All right, so we are live here on Google Plus Hangouts. I'm Laura Pasquini. I'm going to have a conversation with the ACPA President, Gavin Henning, on the future of organizational learning in higher ed. So if you're tuning in live, that's great. We will be tweeting and talking and sharing with the hashtag ACPA Learning. So hashtag ACPA Learning. So today we're really looking to talk about the future trends of what training and development will look like for members of ACPA and other associations, specifically for those in the field of student affairs, student support in higher education. So organizational learning is changing, and it's for different reasons. There's new and dynamic ways that we can make learning happen. So we're gonna talk a little bit about what this might look for folks who support their students in higher ed, and what this looks like in the post-secondary sector of education. So how we work is changing, and the demands are changing. And with that, if we're expected to be in online spaces or deliver services in different ways, then we really need to think about, are we supporting those in the field professionally, staff, faculty, how they're learning and modeling what we should be for our learners. So we're going to talk about ways that ACPA, as one of the many organizations that are rethinking how they're offering things and what the needs of the members are. And I think it's really great. So Gavin, I just want to say thanks for joining us. And if you want to give an introduction of where you are, what you're doing, and I can give a background what I'm doing as well.
Thanks. I'm Gavin Henning, current ACPA president, but my day job is as associate professor of higher education at New England College, where I also direct our master's program of higher education administration and our doctoral program, which has both a K-12 and a higher ed track, which is fun. So we have these PK20 conversations that are happening with our grad students, so it's fascinating. And I love being a faculty member now after 20 years in higher ed, because I'm learning tons from my students. I'm learning about things I never would have imagined by reading dissertation, so it's fascinating and fun.
That's great. And so my day job isn't podcasting anymore, although I do give a shout out to the Break Drink Old Kids, because that was fun. By day, I'm a faculty member with Workplace and Learning Performance. So I'm in the Learning Technology Department at University of North Texas, and I research out of Royal Roads for what online learning looks like. Specifically, my focus will be in how we support, train, and develop in the HR area, and in areas like this that want associations and professional orgs that want to think about how they deliver learning modes and mediums. So today we're going to chat about the general overview and concept is talk about what's going on with professional development today, what kind of approaches and methods and modes are being used, and what does workplace learning and performance mean. So this is really timely because the ACPA the competencies just came out, and we're going to touch on that a little bit. So I talked about it in my blog post. And then we'll also talk about what's on the horizon. So we're going to break out those crystal balls and think about what's lying in the future and what could lie in the future. And if you have questions, please feel free. We have a couple of viewers. You're welcome to respond with that hashtag ACPA Learning, and we'll follow along that, or send me a message, and I'm happy to ask Gavin as well. So let's define a couple things. So when I say organizational learning and development, what does that mean to you, and what does training and development mean to you in higher ed these days, Gavin?
Well, I probably don't know the technical definition. You probably know more about that, Laura, than I do. But I think about as higher education professionals, or professionals in any field, we need to keep on learning so we do a better job at what our task is. And our job here in higher ed, obviously, is fostering student learning and development as well as student success. So we need to develop the skills and knowledge that we're able to do that the best that we can. And it's, I think, probably more important today than it's ever been, because I think both the content and the knowledge is changing and the skills are changing. I did my master's program 1991 and 93, and I tell my master's students everything I learned then is no longer applicable today. That things have just changed so dramatically, and I think they're changing at a faster pace, where we need to do a lot more individually to be able to keep up on that. And fortunately, we have professional associations like ACPA that help us prevent, so we don't have to do it all on our own. So I think it's really about developing our own skills and knowledge to do the best job we can for students.
I think that's great. I do think anyone that comes from a background, so a lot of our professionals in student affairs and student affair educators come from an education background. And I think there is a strong underpinning of educational theory and support. So we have different learning theories that are great foundations for what we're talking about. So it's changed, but it's still the same. So even though learning is different, it's also the same. Same principles go behind it. So I think of workplace learning, whether it's the training, the personal professional development, is learning new skills, sharing knowledge, and transferring knowledge to those around. So that could be in the forms of coaching and mentoring, and on-the-job training is what we really get tossed into. When you start any sort of new position, you kind of know, and when you leave your graduate program, you have inklings and bits and pieces and experiences, but you're really learning on the job. And what does that mean? And how do you get that kind of on-demand training? So in thinking about the future trends, and so I shared out an article about the 5 trends for the future, and it's just around what learning and development looks like. And this comes from my affiliation in training and development. They listed out prioritizing the individual. Some of the recommendations are going mobile, understanding social learning, what it means to have adaptive learning, and considering aligning your goals for learning with business objectives. And I don't know how we do that in Students Affairs, but we'll get into that. And then also measuring effectiveness of the training. So they've gone to learn, and what's the end behavior change and performance, and measuring those 5 things and including those 5 things. So thinking about the future trends, what do you think is likely to influence learning and development for our student affairs educators? Gavin?
Well, I was thinking about 2 things. First of all, I was thinking about delivery methods, kind of like so the issues and topics, as I mentioned, those are changing. In terms of delivery, I'm actually really fascinated right now about the neuroscience of learning. So Marilee Bresciani-Ludwig is publishing a book later this calendar year, and she really looks at that. And it's fascinating because she talks about how, and it may not apply the same way in professional development like this, but definitely in our colleges and universities, we have set up our structure in a way that doesn't support how our brain actually learns. And so we need to do a better job integrating. And that's why reflection is so important. Synergistic learning, where we're pulling information or be able to apply to different settings. And I think we'll probably need to do more of that in professional development, at least think that way, and use some of that neuroscience research to support the work that we're doing. And so I think that will be one thing we'll be taking a look at. I think there's going to be more emphasis on with on-demand training, in the sense that people are going to need to build up skills at different times, and so they may need it for something they're doing next week, something they're doing next year. So having these trainings available, I think, will be helpful, so they can learn the skills as they need them. I also think we're going to move away from, or maybe not move away from, but there'll be more emphasis on shorter time lengths of training. I still think people will still need the credentialed educational programs to demonstrate skill and knowledge, but I think people are going to want to be able to get things more quickly and in shorter time periods, and really probably more specific skill driven. So people may want to go take either some mini courses or do some training around assessment. So they're not going to be part of a whole program. They could choose actually a master's level certificate in that, or they may just choose something that's one or two credits, something smaller. And so I think people are trying to think through, how do they best use their time to learn the specific skills and develop the specific knowledge that they need. And I think obviously we're going to see a change with technology, the impact of technology, because we have a reduction in funds for face-to-face, as well as reduction in time to attend face-to-face events. So I think that some of the delivery elements will need to be thinking about. And then specifically in regard to the topics, there's definitely going to be a focus on retention, and then also around accountability, and how do we actually demonstrate the impact that we're having with students, both student affairs as well as higher ed. And then also technology and what the impact of that is on student development. And then changing student demographics. I think those are all going to impact what we need to think about in terms of training and professional development moving forward.
Absolutely, and I think it's really interesting because you said a couple things between the brain-based learning that you touched on and the reflection. I think that is really important because we do move forward and things are fast-paced, but we don't pause to both digest and decompress what we've learned and engage with. So I think it's really important that we build in those opportunities, whether they're self-reflection, group reflection, or facilitated conversations. I think I really like that idea, Gavin. And we know that there are some growing needs and demands. So I get asked a lot because my background, although I'm a faculty member in learning performance, I've been in student affairs, academic affairs for the last 10 years. And I get asked a lot because they're like, you're the technology person. I said, no, I'm the one who likes to make things efficient and connect other people to each other or learning. So the growing need that people are pushing forward is online and blended learning. And how does the profession kind of prepare for that? Well, you've mentioned it. A couple of them are offering certificates. So I think of University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee has an online student support certificate. And adult learning is nothing new. So we have a wide variety of them that are structuring on both student affair and education courses with how do you design and deliver an instructional design, a pedagogical approach for a program, for a service. So I think it's really great that you brought that up. We see some other ways and challenges coming about. So designing, instructional design, the technologies, whether they're institutional or they're social, and how we deliver is really impacting. So can you share with some ways that ACPA is working or thinking about how this is going to impact how they deliver learning and development for association and members interested in engaging in different ways because of time constraints or funding?
Right. So we're actually in the ending process of launching My Portfolio, which is both a portfolio for demonstrating, for professionals to demonstrate their learning and knowledge within student affairs, but it's also going to be connected to a delivery platform. So we're working with our, to provide this on-demand concept around, so there'll be webinars, video recorded pieces, and that will actually be connected to and aligned with the professional competencies, as you mentioned, that the 2015 version just got launched last month. And so there's this whole big, it's almost a systems approach to thinking about how do we actually align the curriculum with what the profession believes is important. How do we create a delivery system that can meet the needs of folks mobily, on the run, however they're doing it? They can read it on a plane, listen to it as they're on commuting, however they need to gather that information. And then be able to document that, really kind of come full circle regarding how you actually demonstrate that. And we're looking at even providing some certificates. And so we have a certificate of participation connected to even elements of our convention and other types of face-to-face institutes. And then that's really just saying that somebody participated in an intentional learning activity. Then we have a certificate of learning acquisition, which is related to where people actually have to demonstrate their learning that they would do in a course. And then the third one is related specifically to the competencies. So people can actually demonstrate what they've learned related to a competency, which may be really helpful for folks. So that's one big thing that ACPA is looking at. So this whole big system. Another thing we're looking at is the use of apps. Actually, we're working with Marilee Brescia and Ludwig to look at an integrated inquiry app that she's developing for her this brain science work. And so ACPA is actually co-branding that application. And so we'll be launching that later this year. And this I've been able to beta test it this summer. It's fascinating as another way of fostering learning. And then the third thing that might be a good example is a new delivery method we're using for our presidential symposium at the end of the month. And in the past, every president has had a presidential symposium, and it's been a face-to-face event with some speakers around some topic. Well, I wanted to think about something a little bit different. So I wanted to really focus on this accountability piece, which started last year. And so that's where the content was. But I wanted to figure out how do we involve more people than just 30 that can come in a room, and folks that can actually watch the live streaming. And so we thought about this, what we're calling our campus participation party. So we will have an in-person face-to-face event in New York City, but then we're actually going to be streaming out to campuses all across the Western Hemisphere. And it's not just going to be live streaming. We're actually creating opportunities for discussion on campuses. And so I'm really thinking about the whole lecture and recitation idea, where we'd all come together for some big learning and then come together in smaller groups to be able to contextualize that and apply that learning. And we're having 3 modules to really be able to provide some themes to that afternoon, or at least the afternoon in the East. And then the talks are actually only going to be less than 15 minutes long. We have 7 different talks on that afternoon. We also know that people are going to be able to use some of this content later. We're packaging the whole symposium in its entirety, so somebody could actually play that for their campus at another date. And then all registrants will also get access to these short little talks. Plus, we're providing 7 other bonus talks in addition to these. So they can use the class, professional development. So there's this whole idea of engaging people as broadly as we can, and be able to repurpose the material. So the nice thing is we actually have folks from all the way from Canada to the north, all the way down to Trinidad and Tobago, which is really actually 3 miles off the coast of Venezuela. Participants presidential symposium. So we're able to engage more people than we have in the past. So we're excited.
No, that's great. I'm looking at the lineup that you have just that afternoon, and they're all exactly what you're saying, are bite-sized samples. So if you can't tune in, I'm signed up, but I know that I can't tune into all of it, but I know it's great once you have the sign up, you have access to this content, and you could choose how you deliver it and offer training. So some campuses are having watch parties, some are having facilitated conversations and breaking it up because that may be a long few hours for it. So I think that's great that you're thinking about it in multimodal ways, because I don't think if we're going to change the chalk and talk of our class, then why would we not be doing the same thing for our own training and learning and development? So I think this is an excellent lineup you have, and I'm really excited to see some of it live, see some of it later. So I think that's great. Thanks so much for doing this. And so thinking about that on-the-job training, we've seen many people in the profession. We have some creative and brilliant folks that have been in the field for a while, for a little while, for a long while, that have thought about ways of how to collaborate and think about these non-learning technologies. So we are a social bunch. Anyone that's in education, it's hard to say that there won't ever be something social that happens at any one of our conferences in person. So it's not a surprise that we're starting to gather in different online spaces and meeting up in these virtual worlds to share knowledge, to have chats. So the SA chat's been going on Twitter since 2009. We've had different podcasts or video podcasts like this. So we have a Higher Ed Live, which is great because ACPA now sponsors. We've seen Facebook groups and Google Hangouts and many blogs grow, and they're just sharing knowledge. So, and I even think about the SA Grow program that's now been adopted into the ACPA Grow mentoring program. So I'm wondering how in these aspects, because this is how I'm thinking of how social learning, we have these informal kind of clusters and folks that are kind of becoming formalized now, or are being supported in different ways by a professional org. And it's really neat to see that ACPA is one of a few that are starting to do this, to realize, hey, our members are doing some neat things outside of what we do, but how can we involve them and support them? So what do you think about how people are learning socially and networks, and how has this influenced ACPA's thoughts for learning and development?
Well, obviously, I think we think it's valuable. We wouldn't have been. We think that's valuable. I think we're also trying to validate social learning just in general. And trying to move away from this the sage on the stage perspective, in which knowledge can only be delivered by an authority or an expert. And so I think we have done some research. As you know, we think about epistemology and how do we know what we know. There are a lot of different ways that we make sense of information and how we gather it. And social learning is just another way, in addition to the more traditional delivered or received type of learning. And so I think we'll continue to figure out ways to support social learning and be able to use ACPA as a social network to get people connected so that that network is bigger. And because obviously the bigger the network, the more that we can learn from each other and the more people can get connected. So I think we'll continue to look for things like that.
I think that's great. And for those that are trying to incorporate them into their own professional development plan or institution, what might you suggest a professional say to his or her supervisor about these kind of new ways to learn, They are being adopted somewhat formally into ACPA some areas, but not entirely. So how do you suggest a professional or faculty and talks about how they're learning in these areas?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is find out, is the supervisor supportive of social learning or not? Because I think, again, people have different perspectives and different attitudes, and some people may just see it as a way of talking with each other, but not necessarily learning. And so depending on where that supervisor is, there may need to be more education around social learning and why that's important. But I think so there may be some education that's needed. I think the biggest benefit or the biggest way to get some buy-in from a supervisor is to talk about how much an individual is learning socially that doesn't cost any money. And from these most higher ed folks feel there's a responsibility to train the people that work for them, the people that they supervise. And we also know that we don't have the money to send people to conferences, to institutes, because minimally that's probably $1,500 to $2,000. And a lot of people are beginning to wonder, with budgets being shrinking, how can we actually better use that money, and perhaps for students? And so I think that's really the big, huge value, is that the social learning doesn't cost any money, at least most of it doesn't. And the nice thing is we can do it in bite-sized pieces. So if I've got 5-10 minutes in between meetings, I can go on Twitter and see what's happening there, go on Facebook, or do this like this morning, read a blog in between. And so, or I can do it when I'm sitting home at night. If I'm, commuting to campus, I can listen to a podcast. And so there's a lot of different ways we can digest the information, aside from this traditional face-to-face where we all have to be in the same place. And it saves money. And so I think it just may take some education to help validate that type of learning and to demonstrate how important it is and how it can actually be done without costing anything to the institution.
And I like how you said, let's talk about it as just part of your workflow. And so we know that not everyone could sit at a desk 8 hours, nor should they, because it's not healthy. But if they were going to chunk out their day to have a meeting, meet with a student, go to a committee meeting, have a break, and have a 15-minute like lunch and learn or quick learn, I think it's really neat that you said like embedded learning is a mode of delivery, and we need to think about it as a great form of embedded learning at your campus that's free, typically. There could be some donation or brought in if you want to. Some of these orgs and areas might need it. But in general, I think it's a way of kind of having it be part of what your performance is daily. So you have ongoing training and development, not just that once a year convention that we love and is still relevant, but it's throughout the year, there's touch points of PD and training that's accessible and great. So I think that's excellent. And I think it ties in really well to the new competency that there's new competencies in general, the professional competency areas that ACPA and NASPA collaborated on for student affairs educators. I'm going to talk about one of them because there's a few, and it's probably others that are woven into it, but the technology competency is a new addition this year. And I don't know if you want to talk about what your thoughts are with that and how that might impact our field, but I think this, as it is valuable and important for us to recognize that technical literacy is relevant for this field. And if you want to share your thoughts, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Yes, I think it's interesting how the conversation with the 2010 competencies has evolved to the 2015 competencies, because in 2010 technology was still it was part of the discussion, but the team at that point said it should be threaded through everything. And which I think we all agree was probably the end result. And it's the same thing that we've seen with diversity in higher education, and I would also say assessment. In that our ideal is that it's threaded in, it's not a standalone. But I also think we realize as part of the evolution, we have to have it be the visibility and to really say this is important, we've got to really pay attention to it. And so now we're even I'm seeing in terms of diversity that that's expectations in everybody's job. Same thing with assessment. And so some institutions are even moving away from assessment person and saying everybody should be doing it. But I think we really need to spend some time and raise the importance and visibility of technology and what we need to know as professionals in higher education to be able to use that. And it goes beyond, I think, just using different technological platforms for things we do on our campus. Either it's a software package for student conduct or a software package for student retention. Some of that's pretty user-friendly, but we need to think about how do we engage students? How do we use it in a way to make our work more effective? And I think it's probably more complex than you sit down and think about. So the technology companies actually provide some of that structure for us to think through what do we need to know and what do we need to be able to do.
Yeah, I really like that, because you can definitely see as you look through all the competencies, there are relations and there are overlaps, and there should be, because you're not just one little pocket in the competency. You might have strengths, like we look at assessments and self-assessments, but I think it's really interesting that they're going to be looking at more of a digital and information literacy aspect of it, to how do you build a community, or have what does engagement mean if it's going to be in a blended or online space, because you have it happening already, but how do you sustain and keep that momentum going and be part of the community that might already be organic in some areas and also formalize in other areas? I think that's really important. So I think institutions talking about how their communication channels work, to what are some things we should think about for privacy and just data sharing information. So I think that's been really relevant. So it's been great to read through as we look at the competencies, what the outcomes are supposed to be, and immediate, and how that would look like, potentially skill sets that we need to look at, just working at our abilities and looking at our knowledge in these areas around universal design and delivery. So I'm really excited to see how people embrace these, and I'm looking forward to hearing how campuses use this and tease it out as we talk about them further. I know that the convention in Montreal in 2016 is going to have a few different key areas touching on all the different competency areas, and technology is probably one based on interest, based on what we're talking about today. So that's great. Thinking about considerations for student affairs and student educators, what ways do you think a student affair educator, a professional on a faculty member on a campus can currently go ahead and learn more around bringing in, whether it's technologies or learning deliveries? Where would they reach out to for resources at ACPA if they're kind of like, well, where do I get started and where do I get my feet wet? And if you could direct them some resources, that would be great.
Well, I think, as you know, ACPA has a technology task force that was started last year under President Kent Porterfield's term, and they're continuing work on developing resources. And one of their tasks is actually be able to develop resources to foster this technology competency. And so there'll be a sub-team that's working to identify, so what are the resources we can use to actually educate ourselves and educate our students on how to use that. So I'm looking forward to that repository coming out. And I think there's some other places like EDUCAUSE that provides some great information, some other ends. You know, and to be honest, I typically monitor Twitter. That's where some of the most inventive stuff comes out of, and be able to read some of the blogs that people are posting. And so I learn a lot just from that.
That's great. Are there any hashtags that you recommend following if people are getting started, or just seeing this now and they're like, I'm kind of on Twitter, but there's a lot going on the stream, so the hashtags kind of direct where you look. So are there hashtags you follow that you kind of catch your eye?
The basic ones for me are the essay chat, essay pros, and I have also other spots where I'm doing stuff on the essay grad one, because so I don't necessarily focus just on tech.
I think that's great. So essay grad, essay chat, essay pro. I look at a lot of there's different ones on academic advising. So if you're interested in that, higher ed. Is one, advise, and then ed tech if you're looking for technology, and some essay tech. So I'll share some of those and tweet those out for people that want to catch it later.
Actually, I'm writing them down right now.
Excellent. I'll put them out in a second. I was just going to another area. I will share a couple of resources in technology, and this is going to come up in the future as we talk about partnerships with other areas. So you mentioned EDUCAUSE. I want to shout out to Online Learning Consortium, which is formerly Sloan C. WCET, and the PAR network are all great ones that are interested in working with specifically understanding how student affairs educators are supporting students online and in blended learning environments. So there'll be a call to come out for those who want to research and be part of research for the newly formed Data Center at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. And I'm happy to give you more information on that. So Tanya Houston is the director of that research center, and she's the co-primary investigator. So if others want to learn more and get more, we're in the midst of finding some of this groundwork, and we'd love for both ACPA and individual members to be involved. So I'll share some of that, and I'll tweet that out after this interview. So besides ACPA, when you go to learn, how do you learn, Gavin?
I'm a reader. So I learn a lot by reading. So I'm usually have a few different books going at the same time. The challenge, obviously, it takes longer to read a book than it does a blog post or read a series of tweets. But I to really go in depth on a topic. And I also find that reading a book actually provides me an opportunity for some reflection along the way. And all of my, I like carrying my library with me. So I usually prefer ebooks. And then actually keep them on my my iPad mini. And obviously I have the books wherever I go. But even this morning, I was pulling up something, and I was able to pull up on my Kindle app on my one screen while I'm reviewing one of my students' papers on another screen. As I was working on some chapters for a book that we just got off to the publisher, I was able to easily pull up what I highlighted, because my highlights, they sync across devices. My notes sync across devices. And so it really makes convenient for me to go back and see what I found interesting and important. So I'm a big reader still.
I think that's great. I'm a reader too. I'm working on the new social learning. Is a new book. I'll blog about it soon. I probably read a lot of online articles, and then I'm also into visual design and content. So I'm on a few Flickr kind of photo groups that do art and design that it's really important to be a part of. I think about learning, and so in a class that might be tuning in, I have a training and development class that we're invited to join today, live or later, because most of them work full time during the day. That I ask them to think about how they learn, and we have some learning theories, and we talked about pedagogy and andragogy and other areas of adult learning. And I don't know if you're learning something new as an adult and what that means to you now, but my example to them was learning to play an ukulele that someone bought me, and I thought I could play other instruments, but now I have to teach myself something new. And so how do I prefer to learn as an adult? And I've learned a lot about myself and frustrations and things that I reward myself with. But are you learning anything new these days, and what does that mean to you for your experience?
I'm trying to think if there's anything new. There's nothing specific that I'm working on in terms of a specific skill. It's just more to be able to, I really want to be able to expand my knowledge in terms of higher education, but not just focusing on higher education. So even the reading I'm doing is outside of higher ed. So I want to be able to have a multiple interdisciplinary perspective. And I love learning. So I thrive on the knowledge piece. And so I feel like I'm always continuing to try to gather new information. One of the books I'm reading right now is on the cultural history of the elements. So it's about, for each one of the elements we have in the periodic table. So it's about culture, it's about science. It really feeds all those different needs I have. Will I learn anything about higher ed from it? Probably not. But I'll learn some interesting, fascinating stuff. So that's probably what's intriguing me right now.
Oh, that's great. I'll share the books that Gavin and I are reading that are maybe related or not related to higher ed. But I think it's good that you go outside the field too, and you get some ideas that maybe inspire you something else within. Yeah. I see you've done a few. I'll share a few different links because you've done a podcast with the Student Affairs Collective. You did one with Brian. You've done one with, I believe it was with Michelle. So I'll send the SA Lead group. And you're still doing these Ask Gavin H Q&A Twitter sessions. Is that correct?
Yeah, and there's one tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern.
Excellent. And so talk to me about is there a focus for the chat tonight, or is it just in general? Ask any questions.
No, it's just general. It's just more like kind of getting to know me. So it's kind of I'm happy to talk about ACPA stuff or just higher ed in general, or if people want to talk about assessment. Just kind of like a more get to know you fireside chat type of thing.
I like it. Well, for me, I think it's really been great to hear your thoughts on org learning in general, and how training development is going. And it's great to see you supporting in different ways and being part of that learning. So I think this is a really great opportunity to chat with you today, Gavin. And I just want to say thank you on behalf of the viewers now and later that are watching.
Thanks, Laura. It's been fun. I appreciate the time.
Excellent. Well, we're tuning out now, but tune in tonight, and I'll tweet out the live Q&A, Ask Gavin H, hashtag Ask Gavin H, at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. All right, talk to you soon.